You were always my favourite.
Harbo, mate, if I can do a reaction video to Sarah Jane Adventures Series 1, you can sure as hell do a video. Like, come on.
Review the Sarah Jane Adventures. You should review it right now. Get writing. Get typing out that script. I want to see a video on my desk by Monday morning.
Review Sarah Jane Adventures. Come on, man. Let's just do it. Just do it.
Thank you so much for watching. Let us know down below if you also think the Sarah Jane Adventures is the best Doctor Who spin-off.
So maybe you should start reviewing them. Yes, Harbo, we're talking to you.
Review them. What have you got to lose?
And that's why Clara Oswald is the greatest Doctor Who companion of all time.
So, Harbo will review Doctor Who. He'll review Torchwood, but he won't review Sarah Jane Adventures. I did hear him once say that Sarah Jane Adventures was specifically and only and literally for babies. So I think that might be why he thinks he's a bit too high-minded. I think he's a bit too, he thinks he's above it all, which is an absolute shame. He should absolutely review Sarah Jane Adventures. What a coward. He should review Sarah Jane Adventures.
Review Sarah Jane Adventures!
Review Sarah Jane Adventures, please!
Review Sarah Jane Adventures.
Review Sarah Jane's Adventures!
Review Sarah Jane Adventures, Harbo.
Review Sarah Jane Adventures.
Review Sarah Jane Adventures!
Review Sarah Jane Adventures.
Sarah Jane Adventures, Harbo.
Oi! Oi! Where's the Sarah Jane review, Harbo? Hey!
Whenever you have a spin-off of a piece of media, there are always a number of things that are truly inevitable. One of these is the crossover that always seems to happen. Usually the spin-offs converge on the parent film or show for a crossover, but sometimes it's actually the other way around. Indeed, this is the case with the Sarah Jane Adventure story, The Wedding of Sarah Jane Smith, which contains a surprise appearance from the 10th Doctor himself, since 2009 was a sort of gap year for main show content. The serial takes the classic approach of a wedding gone bad, which is another common occurrence in these kinds of shows, but this time it's the villainous trickster who is trying to marry his archenemy off so she can't be around to stop his sinister schemes anymore. So, now that you've finally broken me and forced me to review the Sarah Jane Adventures, how does this episode stack up all these years later?
Stop this wedding now!
I find it kind of weird that the episode begins with the protagonist being paranoid of Sarah Jane not being around them 24/7. I guess they try to justify it by explaining this behaviour as repetitive and their excuses are getting weaker, but I just think it's a strange tone to open the episode with. Did they just forget Sarah Jane has a life as well? Indeed, it turns out that she's been going on days, and I like how the team reacts in different ways, with Clyde disgusted because of cooties, and Rani on the other hand supportive of the secrecy. I think it provides a nice feeling of variety, retaining the individuality of them as characters. I remember having similar reactions as Clyde when I was that age, so it's nice character writing. The reveal has some really nice character moments attached. This is something Sarah isn't used to. Her lifestyle makes it impossible to form lasting relationships, but she's realised it's unhealthy to be consumed by this work. This is a concept explored heavily in the Doctor Who universe, where you see relationships strained by the fact one person knows all these wonderful and terrifying secrets they can't share with anyone else. Obviously, this is a kids show, so it can't really do the same approach as the gritty Torchwood, but I think it's handled very tastefully through nice, extremely human scenes like this one. I also like the fact that they show Luke's perspective of suddenly having a potential dad and not knowing how to react to that. It feels very realistic, so it's another good use of character reactions helping to flesh out the extent of this narrative, because this is a big change for everyone. It's therefore a good idea to have every character snooping in on the situation, since we all know what neighbours are like. Even aliens and monsters are less surprising than this in their eyes. There's some good awkward comedy in it, and it just goes to show how all these characters on the street are like one big dysfunctional family in a way. However, because Sarah doesn't want Peter to be overwhelmed with the sudden knowledge of all these crazy parts of her life, Rani and Clyde have to hide a mysterious box with something inside. Wait, hang on, I know what's in there. Oh my god, it's the Bating! Well, okay, maybe not. It's actually this weird alien slug thing, which escapes because, well, of course it does, what else do you expect? The story doesn't give itself a huge amount of time to spend running around doing a whole double life plot, but in the short moments where it does do it, it's quite fun. It makes sense because of Sarah Jane's struggle for balance. In Torchwood it's all grim and depressing and dramatic to try and keep these things a secret, but because this is a more light-hearted show, they just have fun with it, which I quite like. I mean, they even try to pretend K9 is just some fancy toy, which is a clever explanation to hide the truth that he's a sentient robotic dog from the 51st century. You know, just say he's from Japan and there you go. Easy. However, despite everything going great for Sarah and Luke, Clyde and Ronnie stumble upon a curious mystery, since Peter's house is listed for sale and has newspapers in the windows. So naturally, they go around to snoop. It's more good character work because Clyde knows what they will share is special, so he worries if Sarah gets hitched with this sudden man, she won't be able to live the fun and exciting life anymore, which in turn would break up the team. I think the story handles this idea well without making it seem like Sarah Jane is somehow the villain for simply falling in love. The crucial part is this line.
Yeah. And I wanted to stay happy.
Clyde isn't paranoid because he's selfish and scared of change. He simply knows how deceptive alien threats and monsters can be, because they've dealt with these things all the time before. He just wants to make sure that Peter is legit because he cares about Sarah and doesn't want her to get hurt, which is, frankly, quite sweet. But sadly, he's instantly proven right, because the house is actually like something straight out of the serial killer winter catalogue. It's a very efficient way to sow the seeds of doubt, since it makes absolutely no sense. To have everything abandoned like this is an instant visual communication of things not being right, furthering the plot suitably. Much to Sarah's surprise, Peter proposes to her out of nowhere with a literal flashy ring. Just as a side note, I always find it awkward when people propose in public. Sure, it's sweet when the other person says yes and everyone around them claps, but that audience kind of pressures them to say yes. It doesn't really relate to the episode, it's just something so common that bugs me a bit. At least it's not a sporting event. Never propose at a sporting event. Anyway, now that we know Peter's house is dodgy, the episode turns up the sinister dial. The flashy ring seemingly controlling Sarah so that even suspicious house can be hand-waved away. If I had £1 for every time Sarah was mind-controlled with a ring, I'd only have £2, but it's weird that that happened twice. However, in the most unrealistic part of the episode, it turns out the wedding is already set for 2 weeks' time. No, that's not how this works. Not at a fancy place like this. Come on, get it right, you're breaking my immersion here. I do like that Clyde's persistent suspicion leads to a little spat between him and Luke. It's nice to have this kind of dissension between the team since it adds more layers. You can understand both their perspectives. Clyde has a natural distrust of these kinds of father figures, whilst Luke doesn't have any kind of experience in it, so he's a bit naive. It's a very human exchange with some nuance to it, although it's just a bit awkward that Clyde is yet another black character without a dad, because that's always a great stereotype to perpetuate, isn't it?
Just because your dad turned out bad doesn't mean mine will.
However, despite the suspicions, the wedding goes ahead, with Luke casually wondering if Sarah actually wanted the Doctor to give her away. Interesting to mention him. Surely that can't be relevant. But hang on a minute, what's that? Oh no, the Doctor is here to crash the wedding like he's busted in 2003. All throughout the episode the characters have been hearing a strange noise that we as the viewers immediately recognised as the unmistakable TARDIS engines. It was a nice minor mystery running throughout the episode and I like this payoff. It immediately makes you sit up in your seat because the Doctor has never appeared before. He's always just been a bit of a hushed whisper, a legend from Sarah's past who set her on this track of hunting aliens. This makes it a very climactic ending, tying the shows together. And the best part is, the Doctor himself isn't even a cliffhanger, because the true kicker is the reveal of the Puppet Master, the Trickster. Yes indeed, it was the Trickster all along, the sinister arch enemy of Sarah Jane. I feel like for the strictly Sarah Jane Adventures audience, this is a bigger deal than the Doctor, because they know what the Trickster represents, they're more familiar with him. So the episode is able to successfully pull off this effective 1-2 punch of reveals in a satisfying and gripping way. But before the Doctor can do anything, Sarah is teleported away, the team left all alone with this mysterious man. Obviously Luke has met the Doctor in the Stolen Earth, if only through a computer screen, but the other two haven't. They only know the legends, so I appreciate that they're skeptical of him. After all, it's not like Sarah, who they have an established bond with, so it keeps that sense of imbalance within the team, since they're not all on the same page about trusting the Doctor. And obviously, David Tennant is brilliant as always. He's just delightful and even has one of those football windy things for some reason.
Can I use this? I don't know.
The most important part of any crossover event is maintaining character consistency, so I think it's underrated that they perfectly maintain Ten's writing well, which is obviously helped by the writer having written for the main show a number of times. However, despite the Doctor swaggering in, his TARDIS is stuttering in and out of existence. It pegs the team back, which furthers the stakes of the story, since they're trapped within a single moment of time with no way out. I like this concept a lot. Sure, it's not original by any stretch, but it's a really fascinating idea. They're stuck in an empty void within a looping second. It's Doctor Who time shenanigans through and through, so it makes everything feel more dramatic and tense, because they're hostages in the Trickster's game, trapped in this surreal pocket universe. The Trickster has always been an incredible villain, the perfect kind of antagonist for the spin-off. In any good kids show you need a big recurring villain. In Power Rangers there's always the leader of the enemy, in MI High there was the Grand Master, and so on. The Trickster is this kind of villain and serves the show very well. The design is hauntingly memorable and the actual concept itself is ingenious. He's kind of like the meddling monk, interfering with time for the fun of it, except obviously the Trickster is much more evil. His power is nearly limitless, which means he's always a big time threat suitable for any major episode. Now if you want a really in-depth look at the strengths of the Trickster, I recommend checking out my good friend Joe Brennan's video on the subject, because he does it better than I ever could. One of the most interesting parts of this story is the Doctor revealing what the Trickster is. Unlike Sarah Jane and her team, the Doctor has been travelling through space and time for hundreds of years. He's bound to know who the Trickster is by this point. So it's a clever use of his vast knowledge to expand upon the villain himself and sprinkle in more of his backstory for the audience. I adore their face-off, both knowing legends about each other. Remember, these are two titans of time and now they're face to face at last. Even though the Doctor makes his usual quips, it's a weighty scene, hinting at the Doctor's persistent loneliness and impending death, which means it slots perfectly into its broadcast shortly before Waters of Mars. I think there's a fantastic nuance to the fact that Peter isn't actually evil, he's just being manipulated by the Trickster. It turns out he died in his house, but the Trickster gave him a new lease of life in exchange for removing Sarah Jane as an obstacle to world domination. It's such a brilliant concept and unexpectedly heavy for a kids show. There are nice layers to it, since his and Sarah Jane's love was real, so it's a good piece of human drama as she grapples with this unintentional betrayal. Unlike Peter, she knows what the Trickster really is, refusing this seemingly perfect future because there's always a price. It shows her strength as a character because she knows her enemy and won't fall for easy tricks, even if her friends are being held hostage. That's the Trickster's plan. He has tried using her past against her, but now he knows her true weakness is her love for others, so that's why he's targeting her this way. It's clever character development for the villain, learning new tricks rather than just repeating the same ones.
All you have to say is, I do. And if you don't, you'll remain here forever.
Things get even worse for the team as the Doctor finally summons the TARDIS, only for it to disappear without the others and almost kill Clyde. I know the TARDIS doesn't like some people, but that's taking it a bit too far, don't you think? I mean, at least it gives them superpowers, so that's a good trade-off. Much like the time loop itself, the loss of the TARDIS maintains the stakes and the sense of threat for the episode, once again keeping them one step behind. However, since Clyde has those Artron energy superpowers, he decides to face the Trickster himself, feigning an alliance to whip out the Know You with a classic handshake shock prank. Got him. To be honest, I feel like it would have been more gripping if it seemed like he was actually going to join the Trickster, appearing to betray the others. That would have felt like a massive twist, only to later reveal that it was actually a trap for the villain. It's just a small thing, but I feel as though it would have better maintained the momentum of the stakes. Clyde's plan works though, allowing the Doctor to appear just long enough to hint at the only way Sarah Jane can defeat the Trickster this time, which is Peter. It's very dramatic that the only solution is for Peter to let himself die. It's a heroic yet intensely bittersweet moment as he defeats the Trickster. Such a triumphant redemption for this character who never meant any harm. He was manipulated because the Trickster saw him as weak, but meeting Sarah Jane gave him strength. It proves that the Trickster doesn't truly understand humanity. He knows enough to manipulate and hurt people, but he underestimates the power of emotions and the bonds people form with one another. It's a literal life-changing decision for Peter to make. Imagine being faced with that, having to comply or let yourself die. It's huge. Sure, the power of love is always a cliche, but it's perfectly implemented here, serving as a really touching ending to the story that tugs on your heartstrings. It's a surprisingly heartbreaking and tragic ending for a CBBC show. There's real emotion there, with the perfect music as Sarah has to deal with this loss. However, as if to cheer Sarah Jane up, the Doctor appears in the attic. The scene of the team in the TARDIS is brilliantly directed, and again, the music is great. so mysterious and wondrous to communicate how surreal the TARDIS is with its impossible dimensions. I think it's the perfect thing to do. The Sarah Jane Adventures is obviously tied closer to Doctor Who than the darker Torchwood is, so it makes perfect sense to have the characters enter the TARDIS itself, even if they can't actually travel. It's just quite a wholesome moment. I also really love this quite meta line from Sarah.
Is this the last time I'm ever going to see you?
By this point, Tennant's departure had already long since been publicised and his replacement announced, so viewers knew time was running out for the 10th Doctor. And the line even works from Sarah Jane's in-universe perspective, because she's become used to him showing up randomly before disappearing for years without her knowing which face she'll see next. I just think it's a lovely ending for these two characters, which even includes the perfect mirror of a line from her first Doctor Who departure, bringing everything full circle, especially because these were David Tennant's actual final scenes filmed as the Doctor.
Don't forget me.
Sarah. Don't you forget me.
Don't forget me, Sarah Jane.
No one's ever going to forget you.
The Wedding of Sarah Jane Smith is a very entertaining and interesting story. It has the expected humour and lightness of a kids show, but it's balanced with the exploration of real dramatic and mature themes, meaning the story can stand up well for a wider audience of different ages. Sarah Jane is written and acted superbly, this extraordinary woman having to grapple with the enticing prospect of a new life at the cost of her exciting alien hunting life. The Trickster's plan is really good, and he's a brilliant villain with a very sinister aura to him, which makes his face-off with the Doctor extremely memorable. The time shenanigans lend some high stakes and Doctor Who-y feeling to the narrative. I think the Doctor himself is also used perfectly. He's obviously a familiar face for the audience to get excited about, but he doesn't dominate the plot. He only really shows up in Part 2, and even then he doesn't save the day himself. Instead, it all comes down to Peter, Clyde and Sarah to resolve the crisis. This means the story isn't derailed by the guest strutting in and taking over the show. He's instead there as a complementary figure to add some juice to the narrative. However, I would say that Rani doesn't really get to do enough and kind of fades into the background whilst everyone else has something more important to do in the narrative. It's a common problem with ensemble shows like this, but it's still a massive shame. Overall, Wedding of Sarah Jane Smith is a well-paced, well-scored and well-written story that serves as the perfect crossover with Doctor Who. Even if you aren't familiar with the Sarah Jane Adventures, it's still easy to follow and very enjoyable, so I would definitely recommend giving it a go. After all, it's just fun. And I'd like to thank my Platinum level patron Fallon Cortez and all my Gold level patrons Alex Marston, Calvin, Daniel Shilato, Franz Horn aka Line Vortex, George, Herna Verzog, James Alea Waterhouse, John and Stephen Never Miller. Thank you so much for your support.